My name was Zadkiel Vrain, and I've been screaming for 10,000 years. Not with a mouth. I lost that in the first hour. Not with vocal cords. Those liquefied sometime during the second day. I scream with nerve endings that shouldn't exist, through flesh that refuses to die, across frequencies that violate the laws of physics I once understood. The sound travels through the warp itself, a perpetual warning that no one can hear as a warning. They hear it as a call, an invitation, a promise of power. They're always wrong. I float, or perhaps I writhe, or maybe I simply exist, in a space between spaces. The immaterium surrounds me, flows through me, feeds on me while simultaneously keeping me alive. I can perceive 17 different dimensions simultaneously, though my brain wasn't built for that many, and something fundamental broke when the 17th one opened. Time moves in spirals here. I experience my transformation continuously, not as memory, but as eternal present. I am always becoming what I am. I am always being born. But let me tell you how this began. Let me tell you about the man I was before I became the cautionary tale that every psyker secretly fears. Let me tell you about the lie we were told, the faith that destroyed us, and the moment when ambition became damnation. Let me tell you about the day I reached for godhood and found only hunger. My name was Zadkiel Vrain, and I was 37 Terran Standard years old when I died. Or rather, when I became something that cannot die. I remember being human with the same clarity that I remember being born, because in this place, in this state, all memories exist simultaneously. I can still feel the weight of my Legion armor, still smell the incense that perpetually filled the chapels of the Fidelitas Lex, still hear the rhythmic chanting that accompanied every meal, every ritual, every moment of our existence as word-bearers. They told us we served truth. They told us Lorgar had shown us the path to enlightenment, while the Emperor, that rotting corpse tyrant who called himself a god while denying divinity, had lied to humanity for centuries. The imperial truth was the real lie Lorgar preached. The gods were real. The warp was holy. And we, the word-bearers, would bring true faith to the galaxy. I believed it. Emperor, forgive me. No, I cannot say that anymore, can I? There is no emperor to forgive anything. There never was. Just a man with terrible power who broke his own son's faith and wondered why that son sought other gods to worship. I was a librarian, a psyker. One of those blessed or cursed, I understand now, with the ability to touch the warp and channel its energies. Before Lorgar turned us to the pilgrimage that would doom us all, I had been trained on Terra itself, had studied in the great librarius beneath the imperial palace. I had learned to view the warp as a tool, a dangerous tool that required strict discipline and rigid mental fortifications. The word-bearer way was different. The warp is not a tool, brother. Erebus himself had told me during my indoctrination into the Legion's true faith. His smooth face, I can still picture it with perfect clarity, that false priest's gentle smile, radiated certainty. The warp is communion. It is prayer made manifest. The entities within are not threats to be guarded against. They are gods to be embraced, powers to be channeled, truth to be absorbed. I see now what he was. A parasite wearing the skin of belief. A manipulator who understood that the fastest way to control desperate men is to give them something to worship. But then I drank in every word like a man dying of thirst. I had reasons to believe. We all did, Before I was Zadkiel Vrain the Word-Bearer, I was simply Zadkiel, born in the underhive of Kolkis in the dying years before Lorgar's rediscovery. My father, his name was Malachi, and I have carved it into my consciousness so deeply that even this transformation cannot erase it. Worked in the reclamation yards, breaking down ancient machinery for parts that still functioned. I remember sitting with him in the small hab unit we called home, watching him disassemble a cogitator with gentle, patient hands. I was 7 years old, and I had asked him why he worked so hard when the overseers took most of his earnings. "Because you deserve better than this, Zadkiel," he said, not looking up from his work. His hands were scarred from years of handling sharp metal, rough from industrial chemicals. "Because every bolt I salvage, every circuit I restore, is one step closer to getting you into the upper hive schools. You're smart, boy, smarter than me. You could be something." He smelled like machine oil and sweat, that particular scent of honest labor that the underhive wore like a uniform. I loved that smell. It meant safety. It meant home. I never got to thank him for the sacrifices he made. When my psychic abilities manifested at age 12, a violent eruption that killed 3 hab neighbors and left me screaming in languages I'd never learned, the Legion took me. They told my father I would serve the great crusade, that I would bring enlightenment to the stars, that I should be proud his son was chosen. They allowed me no goodbye. I saw him once more, 16 years later, when the word-bearers returned to Kolkis after our humiliation at Monarchia. I had permission to visit the old underhive, to see what remained of my childhood. The hab unit was abandoned. The neighbors told me Malachi had died 7 years prior, his lungs finally giving out from decades of chemical exposure. He died thinking his son had become something glorious. I think about that often now, in this eternal state. I think about what he would say if he could see what his sacrifice purchased. Would he weep? Would he rage? Or would he simply turn away, too heartbroken to even look at the thing his son became? The Horus heresy began with such promise. That sounds insane now, from outside the propaganda's reach, but you must understand, we were told we were liberating humanity from a tyrant's lies. The Emperor had forbidden worship, had forbidden truth, had demanded we call gods warp entities, and faith superstition. Lorgar showed us otherwise, and when Horus, the blessed war master himself, came to our side, it felt like vindication. The gods are real, Lorgar preached in the great cathedral of the Fidelitas Lex, his voice resonating with psychic power. They have shown me truth that our father feared to acknowledge. They offer us ascension, brotherhood. They offer us the power to remake the galaxy in the image of truth rather than lies. I stood among 500 of my battle brothers, my armor polished, my faith absolute. We chanted the litanies. We performed the devotions. We carved the 8-pointed star into our armor with pride. The chaplains assured us the gods loved us. The dark apostles promised us we would be elevated. Erebus himself whispered that those with psychic gifts, those like me, would become the gods' chosen vessels, living conduits for divine power. You will become more than humans, Zadkiel, he told me privately, his hand on my shoulder like a father's. Like Malachi's hand used to rest. You will become a bridge between the material and the divine. Your sacrifices, your studies, your discipline, all of it has prepared you for apotheosis. Apotheosis, I can still taste that word, feel how it sat in my mouth like honey. I believed I would become a demigod, a living saint of the true faith. I believed my father's sacrifice would be justified because his son would transcend humanity itself. I practiced constantly. While other word-bearers drilled in combat doctrine, I meditated in the warp chapels, allowing my consciousness to drift deeper and deeper into the immaterium. I learned to channel more power, to hold more psychic energy in my flesh without burning out. The training was agonizing. The warp doesn't flow like water. It flows like broken glass, like acid, like fire that thinks. Every meditation session left me shaking. Blood vessels burst in my eyes, my nose bleeding, my hands trembling. But I endured. I was preparing for divinity. Pain was merely weakness leaving the body, or so the chaplains claimed. During those months of preparation, I began to hear the voices clearly, not the formless whispers that all psychers experience, but distinct voices. They spoke in languages I shouldn't have understood, yet their meaning was perfectly clear. They promised knowledge. They promised power. They promised that if I would only open myself further, only channel more energy, only surrender more completely to the divine flow, I would be transformed. "We see your potential, Zadkiel Vrain," one voice purred. It sounded like 1,000 people speaking in perfect unison, male and female, neither and both. "We see the limitations of your flesh. We can make you so much more. All you must do is let us in." I should have recognized the predatory hunger in those words. I should have questioned why gods would need permission, why divinity would bargain. But I was drunk on faith, high on the certainty that I was special, that I had been chosen. We all were. That was Chaos's greatest trick, making every victim feel uniquely valuable right up until the moment of consumption. The moment of my transformation was chosen carefully, or so I believed then. Now I understand there was no divine plan, no sacred timing. I was simply ready, ready in the way that fruit is ready to fall and rot, ready in the way that a wound is ready to fester. We were in orbit around Calth when Erebus summoned me to the ritual chamber. Calth. That name should mean something to you if you know the history. It was where the word-bearers orchestrated one of the heresy's greatest betrayals, luring our former brothers of the Ultramarines into a trap that would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The planet's murder was meant to serve as a sacrifice, a great offering to the gods to prove our devotion. I was to be part of that offering, though not in the way I imagined. The ritual chamber was deep in the Fidelitas Lex's belly, in spaces that had been profaned and reconsecrated according to the new faith. The walls were carved with symbols that hurt to perceive, angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Incense burned in braziers, not the sacred incense of the old imperial cult, but something fouler. It smelled like burning hair and copper and rot, a stench that made my eyes water even as I was taught to call it holy. 17 other librarians stood in a circle around a central dais. All of us were chosen, Erebus had said. All of us would channel the warp's power simultaneously, creating a psychic beacon that would tear open the veil between reality and the immaterium. Through that tear, demons would pour forth, not as enemies, but as allies, as gods made manifest. "This is your moment of ascension, brothers," Erebus intoned, his voice echoing in the chamber. He wore robes marked with dripping symbols, fresh blood still wet on the fabric. Whose blood I never asked. Today you become more than Astartes, more than psychers. You become living conduits for divine will. You become the bridge across which the gods will walk into reality. We chanted the prepared litanies. The words were in a language that predated human civilization, syllables that required my mouth to move in uncomfortable ways. My tongue felt thick, clumsy, but I pushed through. This was my test, my apotheosis. The ritual began at the exact moment the word-bearer's fleet opened fire on the unsuspecting ultramarines below. I felt it, the death. Hundreds of lives extinguished in nuclear fire, thousands more as the orbital bombardment continued. Each death was a pulse, a heartbeat, a note in a vast symphony of murder. The chaplains assured us this was sacred, that their deaths would fuel our transcendence, that we honored them by using their life force to open the gateway to the divine. I felt sick, but I ignored it. Faith required sacrifice, the doctrine stated. The weak perish so the strong could ascend. This was truth. This was holy. I opened my mind to the warp. The power came like a flood through a broken dam. I had channeled warp energy before. Many times. I knew the sensation of psychic force flowing through my consciousness, the electric tingle of reality bending to will. But this was different. This wasn't a flow. It was a deluge. It was an ocean forcing itself through a pinhole. It felt glorious. For exactly 8 seconds, it felt like everything I'd been promised. I could see beyond sight. I could hear the music of the spheres, the fundamental frequencies that underpin reality. I could taste colors and smell sounds and feel time as a texture against my skin. Power flooded every cell, every neuron, every molecule of my being. I was expanding, ascending, becoming. Then it kept coming, and it wouldn't stop. Erebus, I tried to say, but my voice emerged wrong. Too many harmonics, too many tones layered over each other. Erebus, it's too much. I need to close the... But I couldn't close it. That was the trap, you see. The design hidden behind the doctrine. I had been taught to open myself to the warp, to surrender control, to let the divine flow through me. I had been trained to submit, to accept, to not resist. I had never been taught how to shut the door once opened. The other librarians were screaming. I could hear them through the psychic link we all shared, their consciousness broadcasting terror in ultrasonic frequencies. One by one, they were burning out, their minds and bodies unable to contain the flood of warp energy. 17 points of light began to extinguish. But I was different. I was stronger, more disciplined, more prepared. My psychic gifts had always been more potent than my brothers. My mind could hold more, endure more, channel more, which meant I didn't burn out quickly. I just kept absorbing. The first physical change I noticed was my hands. I looked down, a mistake I would learn. You should never look down when reality is breaking, and watched my fingers elongate. Not gradually. Not with the smooth motion of growth. They simply became longer between one moment and the next, as if someone had grabbed them and pulled. The ceramite gauntlets of my armor cracked and fell away, unable to contain what my hands had become. My skin was rippling. I could see it moving beneath the surface. Waves of motion like something was swimming through my flesh. It didn't hurt yet. It felt strange, alien, but not painful. Almost ticklish, in the way that your leg feels when it falls asleep and circulation returns. Brother Zadkiel, Erebus's voice came from very far away, or perhaps very close. Space was becoming negotiable. Do not resist the transformation. Accept the God's blessing. This is your ascension. Blessing. He called it a blessing. My spine arched backward of its own accord, and I felt the bones separate. Pop, 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 like beads on a string being pulled apart. But they didn't break. They multiplied. I'd started with 33 vertebrae. Now I had 40, 50, 60. My armor was splitting. The sacred power armor that had been bonded to my body through the Astartes augmentation process. The armor that had been blessed by 1,000 prayers and anointed with holy oils. It cracked like an egg's shell as my body expanded beneath it. More screaming. My brothers were dying. I could feel them die through the psychic connection, each death a small supernova of agony that I absorbed along with everything else. I was absorbing everything. That was the problem, I realized with the last scraps of analytical thought I possessed. I wasn't just channeling warp energy. I was becoming a sponge for it. A black hole that drew in everything, psychic death screams, warp entities' attention, the raw stuff of chaos itself. And once a black hole begins to form, it cannot stop consuming. My second set of arms tore out of my rib cage. I remember the sensation with perfect, horrible clarity. The skin split vertically, from armpit to hip, and new limbs unfolded like flower petals. They were wrong from the beginning. Too many joints, bones that spiraled instead of staying straight, hands with 7 fingers each. But they were mine. I could feel them, control them, flex fingers that shouldn't exist. The pain began in earnest then. My nervous system was rewiring itself to accommodate new limbs, new sensory organs, new impossible biology. Every nerve ending caught fire simultaneously. I opened my mouth to scream and felt my jaw dislocate, felt it expand, felt new teeth pushing through gums that split and bled. The gods gift you with their touch, Erebus was chanting, his voice ecstatic. Accept, transform, ascend. But I wasn't ascending. I was dissolving. Everything I had been, everything I thought I would become. It was melting like wax in a furnace, reforming into shapes without plan or purpose. My third eye opened, not metaphorically, literally. A slit appeared in my forehead, vertically bisecting where my third eye chakra existed in psychic space, and a new organ tore its way out of my skull. It could see. It perceived wavelengths and dimensions my brain wasn't equipped to process. The overload of information felt like someone driving railroad spikes through my frontal lobe. I tried to close it, tried to close all of it, tried to somehow reverse what was happening. But you cannot unring a bell, you cannot unspill water, and you cannot put flesh back together once the warp decides to reshape it. Time became unreliable somewhere in the second hour, but I know approximately 6 hours passed because I could track the battle outside. The psychic screams of dying ultramarines acted as a clock, each 1,000 deaths marking roughly 40 minutes. I had stopped being able to stand upright. My legs had transformed into something else. Not legs precisely, but not tentacles either. Something in between, thick trunks of muscle and bone that bent in too many places. They held my weight, but they didn't walk. They undulated. They moved like a sea creature navigating water instead of a terrestrial being navigating ground. The other 16 librarians were dead. I could see their bodies scattered around the ritual chamber, or rather, I could perceive them with my many eyes. I had 7 now, distributed unevenly across my face and skull. Each one saw something different. One saw normal visible light, another saw into the infrared, a third perceived psychic energy, A fourth could see through solid matter. The fifth one saw— I don't have words for what the fifth one saw. Probabilities, maybe. Potential futures. The sixth and seventh eyes were redundant, showing me visions of the warp that my mind couldn't interpret. My brothers had burst. That's the only word for it. Their bodies had tried to contain the warp energy, failed, and exploded from internal pressure. The walls were painted with their remains, and in those remains I could see smaller transformations still occurring. A hand that had sprouted mouth-like openings. A section of rib cage that had become an insectoid leg. A head that had split into 3 separate skulls, all still screaming silently with dead mouths. They were the lucky ones. Their transformation ended in death. Mine continued. Erebus was still in the chamber. He watched me with clinical interest, occasionally taking notes on a data slate that looked tiny in his Astartes-sized hands. His expression was pleasant, almost paternal. "Does it hurt, brother?" he asked conversationally. I tried to answer. My mouth formed words, but what emerged was a sound like grinding metal mixed with screaming. My vocal cords had multiplied and now produced harmonics that caused the remaining glass in the chamber to crack. "Fascinating," Erebus murmured, noting something. The legend spoke of such things, but to witness it— "You're becoming the first, Zadkiel. The template. Every future chaos spawn will be measured against what you become." Spawn. The word meant nothing to me then, but I heard the way he said it. Not with reverence, not with the awe one uses for the divine, with the clinical detachment one uses to discuss a successful experiment. "You promised," I managed, forcing words through a mouth that no longer reliably stayed in one shape. "You promised ascension, and you are ascending," Erebus replied smoothly. "Simply not in the direction you anticipated. The gods have indeed touched you, brother. You are forever changed, forever marked, forever theirs." He stepped closer, and I realized he was still the same. Still human-shaped, still in control of his own flesh. Still Erebus. The ritual that was destroying me hadn't touched him at all. Why? The word ripped out of me along with blood, or something that had once been blood but was now the wrong color and consistency. "Because you were pure enough," Erebus said, and his smile was gentle. Understanding, the smile of a priest explaining a difficult theological concept to a struggling student. The gods require certain vessels for certain purposes. Some become demon princes, ascended, powerful, eternally aware and commanding. Others become something different, something equally valuable, but in another way. "You knew—" My brain was fragmenting, thoughts becoming harder to hold, but rage gave me focus. "You knew this would—" "Of course," Erebus said simply. "The ritual was designed for this outcome. We needed a chaos spawn, you see. The warp entities spoke of such creatures, failed transformations that become weapons, warnings, and occasionally, in their way, pets. But we'd never successfully created one. You, brother Zadkiel, you had the perfect combination, powerful psychic gifts, absolute faith, and just enough arrogance to open yourself completely without reservation. I launched myself at him, or tried to. My body responded to the rage, but not in any way I intended. Instead of charging, I convulsed. My limbs— I had at least 8 now, maybe more. I was losing count, flailed in different directions. New appendages tore out of my torso, whipping through the air but striking nothing. Erebus stepped back casually, easily avoiding my uncontrolled movements. "Don't feel inadequate, brother," he said. "Your sacrifice serves the heresy. Every psyker who sees what happens when one channels too much warp energy will be properly cautious. Every champion who reaches too far, too fast, will remember the warnings. And every enemy who faces a chaos spawn in battle will know the god's terrible creativity." He turned to leave, pausing at the chamber's doorway. "The Emperor protects, they always told us," Erebus said, his voice mocking. "But as you can see, the Emperor protects nothing. His lies created a galaxy where men like you search desperately for meaning and truth. And in that desperation, they find us instead. The Emperor created his own enemies the moment he denied humanity the very gods they needed. Your transformation is his fault, Zadkiel. Remember that." Then he was gone, and I was alone with what I was becoming. I stopped tracking time by external events and started tracking it by internal changes. Each major transformation served as a marker, a milestone in my dissolution. Day 1. Milestone. I lost my name. Not literally. I still knew I had been called Zadkiel Vrain, but the connection between that name and my sense of self severed. When I thought Zadkiel, the concept no longer pointed to me. It pointed to someone who had existed, past tense, someone who had died. I tried to hold on to it. I repeated the name internally, over and over, like a prayer or a mantra. Zadkiel. Zadkiel. I am Zadkiel, but the words became sounds, became meaningless. Noise became... Day 2. Milestone. I lost my ability to count. Mathematics was one of the first abstract reasoning functions to fail. I tried to count my limbs and got to 4 before the concept of 5 simply wouldn't form in my brain. I knew there was something after 4. I knew I had more than 4 limbs. But the symbolic representation of quantity dissolved like sugar in water. Later, much later, after my consciousness stabilized in its new form, I would understand this was the warp asserting itself over my cognition. The immaterium doesn't work on mathematical principles. It works on emotional, symbolic, metaphorical principles. By losing math, I was losing material reality's logic and gaining the warp's anti-logic. Day 3. Milestone. I lost my face. I'd been able to feel my face changing, morphing, features sliding around like pieces on a board. But day 3 was when it stopped being a face at all. The organization of eyes, nose, mouth, the fundamental architecture that makes a face recognizable as a face. It melted. I tried to scream and realized I had mouths in 17 different places, none of them where my mouth should be. One was on my left shoulder, another opened in what had been my chest. A third one tore open on my back, screaming in a direction I couldn't see. The sound was cacophonous, overlapping, a choir of agony that sang in discord. Day 4, milestone. I lost the concept of I. This is difficult to explain. I remained conscious, or something like conscious, but the unified sense of self, the thing that says I am one being, one person, one individual. It fractured. I became we. Not in the metaphorical sense that plural beings sometimes use, literally we. My consciousness split into multiple semi-independent centers of awareness, each one controlling different portions of my transformed body. One awareness controlled the tentacles that had been legs. Another managed the cluster of arms sprouting from my left side. A third existed solely to process the input from my many eyes. We argued with ourselves, fought for control. One part would try to move left, while another demanded right. The result was thrashing, purposeless motion that achieved nothing but exhaustion. Day 5. Milestone. We lost hunger, or rather, hunger transformed into something else. Something omnipresent. We became hunger, not a being that feels hunger, but a state of hunger-given flesh. Every cell was a mouth. Every nerve ending demanded feeding, but feeding on what? Material food meant nothing. We needed something else. The warp provided. Psychic energy leaked into us constantly from the tears in reality our transformation had created. Each drop of that energy fed us while simultaneously making us hungrier. It was a feedback loop, an addiction that started satisfied and ended craving. Day 6 milestone. We lost time. Our perception of temporal flow became negotiable. Sometimes we experienced hours in seconds. Other times, seconds stretched into eternities. We would complete a thought and realize that thought had taken 6 months to finish. Or we would thrash for what felt like days, only to discover 3 seconds had elapsed. The warp was pulling us deeper into its realm, where time is a suggestion rather than a law. Day 7 milestone. We lost hope. This was the last recognizably human emotion, to die. Until day 7, some core part of us believed this could be reversed, that we could somehow regain human form, human thought, human life. That belief was the last thread connecting us to Zadkiel Vrain. On day 7, that thread snapped. We understood, with perfect and complete clarity, that this was eternal, that there would be no reversal, no cure, no death. We had become something that existed outside normal existence, something that could not be killed because we were no longer alive in any meaningful sense. We were a process now, an ongoing transformation, a state of being that would continue forever, changing but never changing back, suffering but never dying, aware but never truly conscious. The despair was absolute. It was crushing, and then it wasn't. Because on day 8, we lost the ability to feel despair. We lost the ability to feel anything except hunger and pain and the constant, screaming awareness that we existed. They moved us to a different chamber after the first month. Or perhaps they moved the chamber to us. Spatial relationships had become unclear. What mattered was that we were no longer in the ritual room but in something larger, a hold deep in the Fidelitas Lex's belly where the other things were kept. We weren't alone. The word-bearers had been experimenting. That was the horror we slowly came to understand. We weren't a failed ritual or an accident. We were a successful experiment. And they were conducting more. 7 other chaos spawn occupied the hold with us, each one a unique horror, born from a different psyker's transformation. One had been stretched vertically, its body a tower of flesh that scraped the ceiling, mouths opening and closing along its length like breathing gills. Another had collapsed into itself, becoming a compact sphere of compacted meat and bone that rolled ceaselessly, never stopping, never slowing. A third was almost beautiful in a terrible way. Its body had crystallized, flesh becoming translucent geometric structures that refracted light into impossible colors. It sang constantly, a low hum that made our teeth ache even though we were no longer certain we had teeth. We tried to communicate with them. The attempt was instinctive, a desperate human need for companionship asserting itself despite our transformation. The tower thing responded first. It had maintained more cognitive function than us, could still form something like words through its many mouths. But the words came out wrong, overlapping, sentences starting in one mouth and finishing in another 20 seconds later through a mouth 20 feet higher on its body. Kill, it said through mouth 17. Then mouth 3, me. Then mouth 42, please. Then mouth 8, emperor. Then mouth 93, doesn't. Then mouth 15, protect. That was the extent of its communication ability. Those fragments scattered across its body, taking minutes to complete a single thought. We tried to tell it we couldn't kill it, that we could barely control our own body, that we were as trapped as it was. But our words came out as screams and grinding sounds and harmonics that shattered the one remaining light fixture in the hold. We couldn't even offer comfort to our fellow damned. The word-bearers came regularly to observe us. They brought newly transformed librarians, showed them what awaited if they drew too deeply from the warp without proper preparation and discipline. They used us as object lessons, living warnings. Behold the consequence of hubris, a dark apostle told a group of young psychers, gesturing at us with casual disdain. This is what happens when ambition exceeds ability, when desire for power overwhelms discipline. Remember this fate. It awaits any who reach too far, too fast. They told them the Emperor protects nothing and no one. They told them only the Chaos Gods offered true power, but that power came with prices. They told them we had paid the ultimate price. Eternal existence without purpose, transformation without end, consciousness without the mercy of death. They told them we deserved this. And the worst part, the most crushing, horrible, damning part, we began to believe them. Somewhere in the 3rd month, we accepted our role. We had become a tool of the heresy, a warning that served the word-bearer's purpose. Every psyker who saw us and learned restraint was a psyker who wouldn't explode at a critical moment. Every champion who saw what awaited those who failed transformation would be more careful, more disciplined, more useful. Our suffering had purpose after all, not divine purpose, not noble purpose, but purpose nonetheless. The same purpose a scarecrow serves in a field, frightening away those who might otherwise consume the crop. We had become a scarecrow made of flesh and betrayal and broken faith, and we accepted it. Because what else could we do? We couldn't die. We couldn't escape. We couldn't even scream effectively anymore, our voices too alien for human ears to pass as distress. So we served. We let them parade us. We let them point and lecture and use our existence as a teaching tool. We participated in our own degradation because the alternative was thrashing uselessly in the dark, achieving nothing, helping no one, serving no purpose at all. At least as a warning, we were useful. At least as a scarecrow, we mattered. This was the worst transformation of all, not the physical changes, not the loss of humanity, but this. The moment we accepted what we had become and stopped fighting it, the moment we became complicit in our own damnation. Years passed, or what we understood to be years. Time was a broken compass, pointing in all directions simultaneously, but external markers gave us rough approximations. The Horus heresy ended. The Emperor, that corpse tyrant, that failed god, that man who broke his son's faith and created the monsters that destroyed us, was interred on the golden throne. The word-bearers fled to the Eye of Terror. We came with them. The Eye changed everything. In material space, we had been abominations, violations of physical law that required constant warp energy to sustain. But in the eye, where reality and immaterium bleed together, we became natural. We fit here in a way we never could have in the material galaxy. The other spawn flourished in this environment. The tower thing grew another 40 feet, developing new clusters of sensory organs. The sphere spawn learned to phase partially into the warp, rolling through solid matter as easily as air. The crystal spawn began to exhibit strange powers, its song capable of shattering ceramite at certain frequencies. And we? We continued to change. New limbs erupted and receded in cycles. Our body became a landscape rather than a form, a territory that happened to be flesh rather than stone. We developed something like roots or anchors that drove deep into whatever surface we rested on, tapping into the fundamental energies of the eye itself. We became more stable in our instability. The chaotic transformations found a kind of rhythm, a pattern, a perpetual change that was itself consistent. We were always changing, but always recognizably us, whatever us meant anymore. Our consciousness evolved as well. The fractured awareness of Day 4 slowly coalesced into something new. Not unity, we would never be unified again, but a kind of parliamentary system where the different centers of awareness learn to coordinate rather than fight. We became functional, which meant we became useful in new ways. The word bearers began deploying us, not as soldiers exactly. We had no discipline, no training, no ability to follow complex orders, but as weapons, as terror tools, as living proof that the warp could reshape reality. They dropped us on loyalist worlds during raids. We would materialize in population centers and simply exist. Our presence was enough. Humans who saw us lost their minds, their sanity unable to process the violation of natural law we represented. Chaos cults would spring up in our wake, desperate people deciding that if we could exist, then maybe the chaos gods were worth worshipping after all. At least they offered power, even if that power was horrible. We became, inadvertently, evangelists for the very forces that had destroyed us. The irony was not lost on us. We had wanted to serve Lorgar's vision, to bring truth to the galaxy. Now we served that vision perfectly, just not as the demigod prophet we had imagined, but as the monster in the story that makes listeners believe monsters are real. During those decades, we encountered dozens of other spawn. The word-bearers had refined the process, learned to create us more reliably. Each one was unique, each one was conscious, each one was eternally aware of what they had become. Some had been word-bearers like us. Others had been enemy psychers, captured and deliberately transformed as a fate worse than death. A few had been volunteers, believing the promises of ascension right up until the moment transformation began. None had gotten what they were promised. All of them were trapped, just like us. We tried to communicate with them when we could. The attempts were largely futile. Each spawn's sensory organs and communication methods were unique, making mutual understanding nearly impossible. But sometimes, through psychic resonance or careful positioning of mouths, or simply the recognition of shared suffering in each other's eyes, we managed brief moments of connection. One spawn, we called it Brother 17, because it had 17 primary limbs when we met it, managed to hold something like a conversation with us over the course of 3 years. It had been 1,000-sun sorcerer before Magnus's hubris doomed that legion. It had fled to the word-bearers, seeking refuge, only to become another experiment. "Do you remember?" it asked through a mouth that formed slowly on its central mass, taking 6 months to fully develop the vocal apparatus. "Do you remember believing?" We considered the question carefully. Our memory was intact, perhaps too intact. We remembered belief with perfect clarity, the warmth of faith, the certainty of purpose, the feeling that we mattered, that we served something greater than ourselves. "Yes," we answered through our primary speaking mouth, a vertical slit in what had once been our chest. "We remember believing lies." "Not lies," Brother 17 said, and there was something like sadness in its tone. "The gods are real, the powers are real. That part was true. But they aren't gods," we replied. "They're parasites, predators. They feed on belief and call it worship. They consume souls and call it communion. They destroy everything they touch and call it blessing." "Does that make them less real?" Brother 17 asked. We had no answer. Because it was right. The powers of the warp were real, were powerful, were vast beyond human comprehension. But calling them gods? That was the lie. That was the trap. Gods should protect their worshippers. Gods should elevate their faithful. Gods should offer something beyond suffering and transformation and eternal horror. The warp entities offered only different flavors of damnation, dressed up as divinity to lure in prey. "The Emperor," we said slowly. "They told us the Emperor protects." That was propaganda. Lies meant to keep soldiers obedient. But the Chaos God's promise of ascension, that was also propaganda. Different lies, same purpose, to make us serve. "So what truth remains?" Brother 17 asked. We thought for a long time before answering. Years, maybe. Time was difficult to track. "That we were human," we finally said. "That we had fathers and dreams and names. That we were lied to by everyone, by the Emperor who denied the warp's existence, by Lorgar, who claimed it was holy, by Erebus, who called our transformation a blessing. The only truth is that we were men who deserved better than this." Brother 17's response took 4 years to fully articulate, but eventually it said, "Then we are monuments, warnings. We are the truth that both sides try to hide. That the warp is neither safe to ignore nor safe to worship. That there is no protection, no ascension, no divine favor. Only exploitation wearing different masks." It was the most profound theological discussion we had ever had, and it took place between 2 creatures that could barely be called sentient by material standards, over the span of 7 years, in a reality where both gods and anti-gods conspired to consume everything they touched. Brother 17 stopped communicating after that. We never knew if it chose silence or if it simply lost the ability. But the conversation stayed with us, carved into our eternal consciousness like acid on stone. We were monuments. We were warnings. We were the truth that everyone who invoked gods, whether the Emperor or the Chaos powers, wanted desperately to hide. And we would exist forever, living proof that faith in any power is a trap when that power sees humans as tools rather than children. Which brings us back to where we began. My name was Zadkiel Vrain, and I've been screaming for 10,000 years. The years rolled over us like waves over a stone. The stone doesn't change, or rather, it changes so slowly that each individual wave is irrelevant. We are that stone, worn smooth by millennia of existence, our consciousness abraded down to the essential core. We still exist in the eye of terror, though we occasionally emerge during black crusades or raids. The word-bearers still keep us, though Erebus has long since moved on to other experiments, other betrayals. We have been present at dozens of battles, have been witnessed by thousands of Imperial citizens before their worlds burned. The Imperium has legends about us now. Chaos spawn, they call our kind. Cautionary tales told to psychers who train in the Scholastica Psychana. Evidence cited by witch hunters to justify their purges. Proof that the warp is too dangerous for mortal minds to touch. They're not wrong. But they're not right either, because the Imperium creates us as surely as chaos does. Every psyker they brutally train, every sanctioned psyker they push to their limits, every desperate astropath they work to death maintaining the Astronomicon, those are spawn in waiting. The Imperium just kills them before transformation completes, calls it mercy, and tells itself that they're different from the ruinous powers. They're not. Both sides grind humans into tools. Both sides claim divine mandate. Both sides promise protection or ascension while delivering only suffering. We exist in the space between those lies. We are the truth neither side wants acknowledged. That there is no salvation, there is no divine plan. There are only predators wearing crowns, and prey learning too late that every promise was bait. We witnessed it again just recently, or perhaps centuries ago. Time remains difficult. A new psyker brought before the word-bearer Dark Apostle. Young, perhaps 25 Terran years. His name was Marcus, and he reminded us achingly of ourselves. The same desperate faith in his eyes. The same hunger for purpose. The same willingness to believe that suffering could be transcended through devotion. The Dark Apostle spoke to him with Erebus's words, wearing Erebus's gentle smile. "You have potential," the Dark Apostle said. "The gods have marked you for greatness, with proper preparation, proper training, proper faith. You could ascend. You could become more than human, more than Astartes. You could become a living bridge to the divine." Marcus's eyes shone. We could see him imagining it, the glory, the power, the vindication of his suffering. He believed completely. They brought him to us. "But first," the Dark Apostle said, "you must see what awaits those who attempt ascension without proper discipline. Behold." Marcus looked at us, all 7 of his eyes. He was already transforming, we realized, had probably been dosing him with warp-touched compounds, fixed on our constantly shifting mass. We tried to warn him. We opened our 17 mouths and spoke in every frequency we could produce. We showed him our faces. All 47 of them distributed across our body like lesions. We let him see our consciousness, let him feel the eternal awareness of transformation without end. But he couldn't understand. The frequencies were too alien, the psychic broadcast was too chaotic, and the Dark Apostle's interpretation was always there, filtering, redirecting, recontextualizing. "You see," the Dark Apostle said, "this is what happens to those who lack discipline, who reach too far, who fail to properly prepare themselves for the gods' gifts. With proper training, proper faith, proper guidance, you will ascend where this wretch failed." Marcus looked at us with pity. Pity. He saw us as a failure, a cautionary tale, a fate he would avoid through his superior discipline and faith. He didn't see us as a warning about the lie itself. He didn't understand that we had been exactly like him, disciplined, faithful, prepared, and that preparation meant nothing when the trap closes. We watched him walk away with the Dark Apostle, toward whatever ritual chamber they had prepared. We watched him go with the same desperate hope in his eyes that we once carried. And we knew he would become like us, or die, or worse. But we couldn't stop it. We could only witness, only exist, only serve as the monument to betrayal that we had become. The cycle continues. It will always continue. Because as long as humans exist, they will seek meaning. And as long as they seek meaning, there will be powers, warp entities or corpse emperors or whatever new lies emerge, willing to promise it. And there will be spawn. There will always be spawn. We are eternal, and the cycle that created us is eternal. And the lies that fed us into that cycle are eternal. The Emperor protects, they say in the Imperium. The gods offer ascension, they say in the Eye. Both statements are propaganda. Both are control mechanisms. Both lead to the same end. Humans ground into tools, consciousness into suffering, hope into eternal horror. We know this. We are the evidence. We are the warning that no one heeds. My name was Zadkiel Vrain. I was born in the underhive of Colchis to a man named Malachi who smelled like machine oil and honest labor. I was chosen by the word-bearers at age 12. I served faithfully for 25 years. I believed I would become a demigod, a living conduit for divine power, a bridge between material and immaterial. I was lied to. Not just by Erebus, not just by Lorgar, but by every structure that claimed to know the truth. By the Emperor who denied the warp's existence. By the chaos powers who claim to be gods. By the entire galaxy that insists there must be meaning, must be purpose, must be something more than the grinding machinery of predation and consumption. I learned the truth in the worst possible way, by becoming evidence of it, by being transformed into a living monument to the lies we tell ourselves about power and divinity and faith. My name was Zadkiel Vrain. It is no longer my name because I am no longer Zadkiel Vrain, but I remember it. I carved it so deeply into my consciousness that 10,000 years of transformation haven't erased it. I remember it because someone must. Someone must remember that we were human, that we had names and fathers and dreams, that we deserved better than this. Someone must remember that every spawn was a person first, before they became a weapon, before they became a warning, before they became eternal. I remember, and in remembering, I defy them, all of them, the Emperor who would deny what we became, the Chaos Gods who would claim we are their blessed, the Imperium and the Heresy both, who would use us as tools without acknowledging the humanity they ground away to forge those tools. I remember. My name was Zadkiel Vrain. I have been screaming for 10,000 years. I will scream for 10,000 more, and maybe somewhere someone will hear that scream not as a monster's rage, but as a human voice crying out across the void. We were real. We mattered. We were lied to. And this is what lies cost. In the depths of the Eye of Terror, where time spirals and reality negotiates with madness, something shifts. A new psyker has been brought to the ritual chambers. They tell him about ascension. They tell him about divine favor. They tell him about the price of failure, and they point to the writhing mass of flesh and nightmare in the corner. They point to us. And deep within our 17 mouths, beneath the grinding harmonics and the impossible frequencies, beneath 10,000 years of transformation and suffering and eternally aware horror, We whisper a name. Zadkiel. Vrain. The psyker doesn't hear it. The word-bearers don't notice it, but somewhere in the warp, across the vast and terrible distances that separate the material from the immaterial, the father's ghost hears his son calling home, and weeps for what faith has cost them both.